Get out and stay out, my dad yelled. They expelled me for walking away from surgical residency. They had no idea I was worth $32 million. The next day, I relocated to my fortress in Laguna Beach. 3 weeks later, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from right now. Have you ever been forced to choose between your family's ambitions and your own life? I want to hear your story. The Philadelphia house always smelled like disinfectant and old timber. A stone estate on the main line, engineered to feel severe, immovable, ancient, just like the men who claimed ownership of it. My father, Dr. David Sterling, chief of surgery, worshipped hierarchy above all else. In that house, affection wasn't offered freely. It was rationed, measured out in precise doses according to performance. Dinner was served at 6 on the dot. My brother Tyler, the heir, the prodigy, sat to my father's right. I sat to his left. My mother, Patricia, occupied the seat at the end of the table, silent, ornamental, an observer trapped in a room ruled by ego. Oil portraits lined the walls, ancestors clutching scalpels, their painted eyes fixed on us in permanent judgment. Tyler, tell us about the aneurysm repair, my father would say, carving his steak with surgical exactness. Clean clip, Dad. Dr. Evans let me close, Tyler would reply, glowing. Excellent, my father would nod, satisfied. Then his gaze would shift. Chloe, how was your rotation? I learned young that there was only one acceptable response: 36 hours. 3 appendectomies, perfect sutures. What I never mentioned was the other life, the one that began when the hospital lights dimmed and I slipped into the server room. While Tyler memorized anatomy, I taught machines how to recognize it. Where they saw ritual, I saw inefficiency. Where they saw tradition, I saw data. My partner Ethan, a coding prodigy I'd met in undergrad, called it Panacea, an AI capable of predicting surgical complications faster than any human mind. My father dismissed technology as a servant's tool. To him, real doctors cut, real doctors bled. Anything else was administrative nonsense, so I lived 2 lives. By day, the flawless resident stitching skin with steady hands. By night, the architect of a digital revolution. The pressure was suffocating. Sometimes I'd catch my mother sitting alone in the drawing room, staring at the grand piano she never played. Dust clung to it, a monument to a life abandoned. She had once been a concert pianist before marrying into the dynasty. Now she arranged centerpieces and managed social calendars. One night, I found her tracing the keys without sound. Do you miss it? I asked. She recoiled as if burned. Don't be ridiculous, Chloe. Your father needs a wife, not a musician. That was when I understood the truth. My mother wasn't fragile. She was a warning. She had traded her voice for security, her passion for prestige. And somewhere deep inside, I think she resented me for trying to escape the cage she had welded shut around herself. When she told me to listen to my father, she wasn't protecting me. She was protecting the narrative that her sacrifice had been necessary. If I escaped, it would mean she could have too. And that truth would destroy her. So I kept going, coding, operating, waiting for the equation of my life to finally resolve. Then the email arrived. It was the 36th hour of my shift. I was scrubbing out of a 7-hour craniotomy. My hands were raw, my eyes burned under the fluorescent lights. My phone buzzed against my hip. One email. Subject: acquisition complete, wiring amount $32 million. I didn't react. I just stared at the screen, blue light reflecting off the dried blood speckling my clogs. The number felt unreal, abstract, like a heart monitor flatlining. But this wasn't death, it was birth. Ethan had done it. We had done it. I drove straight to the manor. Rain fell in sheets, turning Pennsylvania slate into a black mirror. I didn't change out of my scrubs. I wanted them to see the uniform they worshipped one last time. Dinner was already underway. The silence was thick, broken only by silverware scraping porcelain. David sat at the head of the table, a king in his castle. Tyler was mid-story, bragging about humiliating a junior resident. Patricia pushed peas around her plate, eyes unfocused. I'm resigning, I said. I didn't sit. David didn't look up. Sit down, Chloe, you're exhausted. We'll discuss your schedule after you've slept. I'm not tired, I said evenly, my voice cutting through the room like a fresh scalpel. I submitted my resignation 20 minutes ago. I'm done with surgery. I'm done with this hospital. I'm done with this life. The silence that followed was violent. David slowly set down his utensils and looked at me. For the first time, I saw the void behind his eyes. He wasn't seeing a daughter. He was staring at a malfunctioning possession. You are a Sterling, he said quietly. We cut. That is who we are. If you walk away from that residency, you walk away from this family. I'm leaving to lead a technology division, I said. I built something, Dad. Something that will save more lives than your scalpel ever could. He stood abruptly, face flushing dark. Technology, he snarled. You want to be a technician. Support staff, his hands slammed the table, crystal rattling. You are disgracing 3 generations. You are humiliating me. There it was, the core wound. It was never about my happiness or my potential. It was a narcissistic injury. To a man like David, children weren't people. They were mirrors. I existed to reflect his greatness. By choosing a path he couldn't dominate, I shattered the mirror. I proved his approval wasn't the oxygen I needed to live, and that terrified him. If you walk out that door tonight, he hissed, pointing, you leave with nothing. No trust funds, no connections, no name. I don't need your name, I said. I have my own. Give me the keys, he demanded. I paid for the car, the clothes on your back. If you want independence, start walking. I reached into my pocket and placed the Audi key fob gently on the linen tablecloth right beside his untouched wine glass. You're right, I said. You paid for everything except my mind. Then I turned and walked out. I heard my mother gasp, a small, strangled sound, but she didn't move. She never did. Outside, the rain was torrential. I stood there with a laptop bag, a phone showing a $32 million balance and nowhere to go. The oak door slammed behind me like a gunshot. He thought he'd punished me. He didn't realize he'd amputated something diseased. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I walked to the edge of the property where manicured lawn met tree line and sat on a rain-soaked stone wall. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the darkness. My accounts were frozen. David had locked the trust fund I hadn't touched since I was 18. My credit cards were canceled, homeless. Penniless, alone, or so he thought, I logged into my secure cloud server. The acquisition funds sat in escrow, waiting for my authorization. $32 million, not just money, leverage. Power, a weapon. I entered the code, transfer complete. Then I searched for housing, not hotels, not rentals, California. I had always dreamed of the ocean, far from gray stone and gray skies. I found it, a fortress in Laguna Beach, 24.5 million, brutalist concrete, floor-to-ceiling glass perched on a cliff in Emerald Bay. A bunker designed by a poet, indestructible, elegant, cold. I called the realtor. It was 3 a.m. in California, but for that price people answer. I want it, I said, cash. Today, Miss Sterling, you haven't even seen. I've seen enough, send the papers. I closed the laptop. The rain had stopped. The silence was heavy but no longer oppressive. It was empty and it was mine. I didn't go to a hotel. I went to the only place that felt safe, the server room at our startup, a small, windowless space humming with cooling fans. The air was clean, filtered. I curled up on a beanbag chair, coat still damp, and fell asleep to the sound of servers, the sound of my future, the sound of my freedom. The next morning, I flew to California. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't say goodbye. I simply vanished. The house was even more imposing in person, a monolith of concrete and glass staring out over the Pacific. I stood in the empty living room, the ocean roaring below, and I felt nothing, no joy, no triumph, just a cold, hard sense of safety. I was safe. No one could hurt me here. No one could tell me who I was. I hired a security team. I installed cameras. I bought a white Range Rover, the kind of car my mother would have called vulgar. I drove it fast along the coast highway, the wind whipping my hair, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care what anyone thought. I was building a fortress, not just of concrete and steel, but of silence and distance. I was ghosting my old life. I was becoming someone new, someone unbreakable. For 3 weeks, the silence was a balm. I healed in the quiet of my concrete sanctuary. I woke up when I wanted. I ate what I wanted. I didn't have to report my location, my sutures, or my worth to anyone. I was a ghost in my own life, and it was paradise. Then the contagion hit. TechCrunch ran the profile on Tuesday morning. The headline was catchy, designed for clicks, the surgeon who traded the scalpel for code inside the $32 million exit. It detailed everything, the acquisition price, the technology, and in a small paragraph near the bottom, it mentioned my relocation to a private estate in Emerald Bay, Laguna Beach. The news traveled from Silicon Valley to the Philadelphia mainline faster than a virus in a pressurized cabin. My phone, usually dormant, began to seize on the kitchen counter. Notifications stacked up like incoming trauma cases, cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade, medical school peers who had snubbed me, and then the inner circle. Tyler texted first, no greeting. No congratulations, just a screenshot of the article and 3 words. Is this real? It wasn't brotherly concern, it was an audit. Tyler was calculating the net worth difference between a neurosurgeon resident and a tech founder, and the math was making him sick. I didn't reply. Then my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it standing by the infinity pool, the ocean crashing below. Chloe, her voice cracked thick with performance anxiety. Your father is falling apart. He saw the article. He's in a state we didn't know. You have to understand. We were just worried about you. We're coming to see you. We need to repair this family before it's too late. We land on Saturday. They weren't asking, they were announcing. It was the old dynamic. They dictated the schedule and I was expected to scrub in, but they had miscalculated the venue. They weren't coming to the manor in Philadelphia where they held the keys. They were coming to my fortress. I could have blocked them. I could have told security to turn them away at the gate. But I realized that wouldn't be enough. If I blocked them, I would always be the runaway child in their narrative, the daughter who couldn't handle the pressure. I needed them to see. I needed them to walk through the concrete halls. I needed David to look at the empire I built with servants' tools. I texted back 2 words, Saturday noon, then I prepared the house. I didn't buy flowers, I didn't soften the edges. I wanted the house to look exactly like what it was, cold, expensive, and impenetrable. I wasn't preparing a home for a family reunion. I was preparing a boardroom for a hostile takeover. I called Ethan. They're coming, I said. Do you want me there? He asked. No, I said, I need to do this alone, but keep the server logs open. I might need to show them the back end. You're going to show them the code? No, I said, looking at the sun reflecting off the water like a blade. I'm going to show them the future. They arrived at noon, exactly. A white rental sedan crawled up the winding driveway, looking like a toy car against the massive scale of the concrete walls. I watched from the upper terrace. They stepped out into the California sun, blinking like moles dragged into the light. They were dressed for a Philadelphia country club, heavy tweeds, stiff loafers, pearls. In the stark salt air brightness of Laguna, they looked gray. They looked out of place. They looked like the past. I walked down to meet them. I didn't offer a hug. I didn't offer a hand. I just unlocked the 10FT pivot door and stood aside. Welcome, I said. They walked in. The silence of the house swallowed them. David stopped in the foyer, his eyes scanning the 30-foot ceilings, the floating staircase, the wall of glass framing the Pacific Ocean. He was looking for a crack. He was looking for dust. He was looking for something to criticize so he could reestablish his dominance. But I ran this house like an operating theater. It was sterile. It was perfect. It's substantial, he muttered, unable to meet my eyes. It's secure. I corrected. I led them on the tour. It wasn't a tour of a home. It was a tour of a fortress. I showed them the infinity pool that dropped off into the horizon. I showed them the guest house that was larger than our entire downstairs in Philly. Tyler walked behind me, running the math in his head. I could practically hear the gears turning, calculating the property tax, the down payment, the net worth required to sustain this. He looked sick. Patricia didn't speak. She just touched the surfaces, the cold marble, the warm walnut with trembling fingers. She wasn't looking at the luxury. She was looking at the freedom. She was realizing that the cage she had spent 30 years polishing was just a cage, and I was standing on the outside holding the key. We sat for lunch on the cantilever deck. The ocean roared below us, a constant, violent reminder of where we were. The private chef served a charred octopus salad. David poked at it suspiciously. He couldn't take the silence. He couldn't take the shift in gravity. He needed to be the chief of surgery again. He needed to be the smartest man in the room. It's a nice view, Chloe, he said, putting down his fork. But let's be realistic. Real estate is a volatile asset. Real work, real legacy happens in the hospital. I took a sip of sparkling water. Is that so? In fact, he said, leaning back, finding his rhythm, we are revolutionizing the department. We just licensed a new system, a surgical intelligence platform. My heart didn't speed up, it slowed down. It was the Predator's calm. David beamed. He was back in his pulpit. It's incredible, actually. It uses predictive algorithms to map complications before we even make the incision. It's analyzing thousands of data points in real time. It's going to save the department's accreditation. We were slipping, I admit it, but this is the future. It catches mistakes the human eye misses. It sounds expensive, I said, baiting the hook. Quality costs, he scoffed. We paid a premium, but the developers, geniuses, absolute geniuses. They understand the anatomy better than half my attending surgeons. I told the board, give them whatever they want. We need this tech. I looked at Tyler. He was nodding in agreement. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the ocean. I looked at David. He was glowing with pride for a machine that he thought validated his brilliance. He had no idea he was praising the very mind he had tried to lobotomize. He was worshiping the servants' tool. It's funny, David said, taking a sip of wine. I always told you that technology was a support role, but this software, it's almost like it thinks like a surgeon, a master surgeon. I placed my glass on the table. The sound of the crystal hitting the stone was sharp. I'm glad you like it, Dad, I said. The interface was the hardest part to design. David stopped chewing. The fork hovered halfway to his mouth. What did you say, Panacea? I said, leaning forward slightly. That's my company, Dad, my code, my patent. I signed the licensing agreement with your hospital board yesterday morning. You're not just implementing a new system, you're implementing me. The silence that fell over the table was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. I watched the realization hit him in waves. First, confusion. He wasn't the master of his domain anymore. He was a user, a customer. He was paying a premium to the very daughter he had discarded because she was useless. Tyler made a choking sound, setting his water glass down hard. He looked from me to David, his eyes wide. He realized the hierarchy had just inverted. The golden boy was now working for the exile. David's face went gray. You own Panacea? I built it, I said, with the servant's tools you despised. For a moment, I thought he might yell. I thought he might storm out, but he didn't. He did something worse. He smiled. It was a tight, desperate grimace, an attempt to rewrite history in real time. Well, he said, his voice trembling slightly, this is extraordinary. I always knew you had a brilliant medical mind, Chloe, even if you applied it differently. This validates everything. We should discuss the integration as a consultant. Perhaps I could. I held up a hand, I'm just saying. He pressed desperation, creeping in that this is a family triumph. We can, there is no we, I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the anger I thought I would feel. You don't get to pivot, Dad. You don't get to claim this. You fired me from this family. You told me I was nothing without your name. Well, now your hospital is paying 7 figures a year to use mine. I stood up. The ocean breeze fluttered the tablecloth. I have a meeting with my CTO in 20 minutes, I said, checking my watch. You need to leave, Chloe, my mother whispered, finally finding her voice. Please, the gate code expires in 10 minutes, I said. Don't make me call security. They stood up. They looked small against the backdrop of the Pacific. They looked like guests who had overstayed their welcome. They walked back through the house in silence, but this time they didn't look at the architecture with judgment. They looked at it with fear. I watched from the foyer as the heavy front door clicked shut. I watched the white rental car wind its way down the driveway and disappear onto the coast highway. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel lonely. I felt the clean, sharp relief of a successful amputation. The necrotic tissue was gone. The wound was closed. I was whole. Night fell over Laguna. The house lit up a beacon on the cliff. I sat in my office, the glass walls reflecting the stars. I opened my laptop. On the screen, a live dashboard showed the Panacea system running in hospitals across the country, including Philadelphia General. Status active. Anomalies detected 0. Lives protected 142. I watched the data stream. It was a heartbeat. It was my heartbeat. I had traded the scalpel for the code, and in doing so, I had saved the most important patient of all, myself. I closed the laptop. I walked out to the edge of the infinity pool and listened to the ocean roar. If you've ever had to amputate a toxic relationship to save your own life, hit that like button and share this story. You are the surgeon of your own destiny.